In this video, we're going to continue look at methods to solve quadratic equations. So far, we have talked about 4 of them. The first one is graphing. We can graph a quadratic equation and look at where the x-intercepts are, and those would be the solutions for x. We can also factor and set each factor equal to 0, and that would give us the values of x. We have also learned that we can take square roots. And we also learned that we can use a method called completing the square. The fifth method that we are going to be using, that we'll be talking about in this video, is using the quadratic formula. Now, if you look at this equation, x squared minus 1x minus 20, we could graph that. Or this one we could certainly factor into x minus 5, x plus 4, like this. Set each factor equal to 0. So x would equal 5. X plus 4 equals 0. So x would equal negative 4. And those would be your solutions. With this next problem, we could graph it. But if we try to factor it, this you'll find can't be factored. And so with a problem like this, you might want to use the quadratic formula. Now let's talk about where that comes from and what it is. So the general form of a quadratic equation is y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. If we go through the steps and set y equal to 0, and we use the completing the square method, which I'm not going to go through in this video, we come up with the equation x is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, and that's all over 2a. And this is called the quadratic formula. And we can use this to solve any quadratic equation. So like in this problem that we said that we were able to factor, let's look at that one. The first thing we want to do is write down the value of a, b, and c. The a is 1. In this case, the b is a negative 1, and your c would be negative 20. Quadratic formula is listed up here. So x is equal to negative b, or the opposite of b. Well, b is a negative 1, so the opposite of negative 1 is a positive 1, plus or minus the square root of b squared. So negative 1 times negative 1 is a positive 1. So let's square that before we write it down. And then minus 4, and then we want a times c. And let's just go ahead and multiply those. 1 times negative 20 is a negative 20. And that would be over 2 times a. So 2 times 1 is 2. And now we'll simplify, and keeping in mind our order of operations, we need to simplify underneath the square root. So first you would multiply. 4 times negative 20 is a negative 80. So 1 minus a minus 80 would be 1 plus 80 over 2, which is 1 plus or minus the square root of 81 over 2. 1 plus or minus the square root of 81 is 9 over 2, which would be 1 plus 9 divided by 2, and 1 minus 9 divided by 2. So that would be 10 over 2, which is 5, and minus 8 over 2, which is negative 4. And when we factored it, remember, those were the answers that we got. So this would be solving using the quadratic formula. Let's look at this next equation that we looked at earlier. A, b, and c would be 2, negative 1, negative 4. So x is equal to negative b minus a minus 1 is plus 1, plus or minus the square root of b squared. So again, negative 1, if we square it, would be a positive 1, minus 4, and a times c is a negative 8. All over 2a, so 2 times 2 is 4. Now let's simplify underneath the square root. So that would be 1 plus 32 over 4, which is 1 plus or minus the square root of 33, and that's all over 4. And so You could approximate those. If you put that in the calculator, you would add 1 plus the square root of 33, hit equals, and then divide by 4. And you would do 1 minus the square root of 33, hit equals, and then divide that by 4. And that would give you the approximate answers. And as you can see, those are right here. The negative 1.186 and positive 1.686, and this is what the graph looks like, and those are your x-intercepts. All right, let's try another one. Now, first thing we need to do is make sure that we're in standard form. So everything needs to be on one side and have 0 on the other. So we will move the 12x to the other side and we'll combine like terms. And then let's bring 9 to the other side. So we would have plus 9. And over here then, this cancels, so we just have 0. Now let's write down A, B, and C. A is 25, B is negative 30, C is 9. So x equals negative b, so minus a minus 30 is a plus 30, plus or minus the square root of b squared. Negative 30 times negative 30 is 900, minus 4, and then AC, 25 times 9 is 225. And that would be over 2a. 2 times 25 is 50. So that would be 30. 900 minus 900 is actually 0. So 30 plus the square root of 0. The square root of 0 is 0. So that would be 30 over 50, which is just 3/5. So there's actually just one answer to that one. And if you look at the graph, we had 3/5. Let me go back here. 3/5, which in decimal form is 6/10 or 0.6. And the reason, whoops, I'm going to have too many here. That's 0.6. Let me go this direction. And that graph looks like this. There was only one answer, and that's because the graph is sitting on the x-axis, right at 6/10 right here. All right, here's another one. Again, we need to get the equation in standard form. So write down A, B, and C. So x equals negative b, so 4 plus or minus the square root of b squared is 16 minus 4. A times c is 5, all over 2 times negative 1. And so we'll simplify inside of the root. That's 16 minus 20, which is a negative 4. So we can't take the square root of a negative 4. We'll be learning in our next lesson how to take the square root of a negative 4, but at this point we can't. And there isn't a real solution to this. So we would put no real solution, no real solution. There is what we would call an imaginary solution, but we're not discussing that yet. So if you have a negative underneath the square root, there would be no real solution. And when we look at the graph of that, notice there are no x-intercepts, so that's why. So go ahead and practice those a little bit. And the last thing that I want to mention here is when we're looking at the quadratic formula, this part underneath the square root is called the discriminant, b squared minus 4ac. And that's important to understand that gives us a hint about how many solutions we should have, or it tells us how many we'll have. When you look at what b squared minus 4ac is, if that value is a positive number, it means you can take the square root of it. So x would equal minus b plus something divided by something, and minus b minus something divided by something. So you would have two solutions, two real solutions if this is positive. If b squared minus 4ac is positive, you'd have two real solutions. When this turned out to be 0, basically this just goes away. So the answer is just negative b over 2a. So in that case, you only have one real solution. And like in the last problem where we got a negative underneath here, well, we can't take the square root of a negative and get a real number, so we would say there are no real solutions. So let's look at how we use the discriminant then to determine how many solutions, real number solutions there would be. So the discriminant is b squared minus 4ac. So we write down a, b, and c. And so b squared would be 9 minus 4. A times c is a negative 5. So 9 plus 20, we have 29. B squared minus 4ac is greater than 0. It's positive. So that means there will be 2 real solutions if you worked out that problem. In the next one, we'll write down our a, b, c. And if we look at just the b squared minus 4ac, that's not finding the solutions. It's just telling us how many we're going to have. B squared, negative 3 times negative 3 is 9. Minus 4 times 14 would be 9 minus 56, which is a negative 47. And that's negative, so we would say there are no real solutions, because we can't take the square root of a negative and get a real number. Next problem, the first thing we have to do before we can figure out what a, b, and c are is get this in standard form. So we would subtract 6x, and we would have to add 9, and then we would have 0 on the other side. So write down a, b, and c. We have 1, negative 6, and 9. So if we're looking at b squared minus 4ac, that would be 36 minus 4 times 9. So 36 minus 36, that's 0, which means we would have 1 real solution if we worked out the problem in full. And that's it for this lesson. Let me know if you have questions. Thanks for watching.